Have you tried Music to Code By yet? Well, why not? Here's a comment Joe left on the website. This is also great music to mow by. I like listening to music while doing yard work to help the monotony of it seem less tedious. This past summer, I started listening to these tracks while doing yard work, and they worked great. I could let the music play in the background without focusing on it, and it seemed to help me concentrate on getting through my tasks. Thanks, Joe. And you know, now you can download the entire 13-track collection. That's over 5.5 hours of music to code by for only $39. Check it out at musictocodeby.net. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
We're somewhere in London.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Shoreditch.
Shoreditch, yeah.
Shoreditch.
Progressive Networks, Skills Matter, their conference here. And we're talking. We just got off stage. We did a little talk.
That developer platform talk, which, as opposed to calling it, what's going on?
Yeah.
Which is just sort of a summary of what we've done in shows.
Yeah.
We updated it again today and realized, like, this is not important anymore.
But we keep finding little things about the past and the current, present, and the future that we didn't understand before.
Yeah, they all sort of tie together. So I'm very pleased with our update today.
Yeah, it was a good update.
We did a good version of it.
Jon Skeet is here. We'll be talking to him momentarily. But first, we have this little business called Better Know a Framework.
Awesome. All right, dude, what do you got?
And John, you're here. You're Google. You can chime in on this.
Google.
Material design.
Oh, I know nothing.
No, but
I'm not a front-end developer.
But that comes from your people.
It does.
Yes.
All you Google people are connected together, right?
We all know each other, really. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, Better Know a Framework is not about material design, but it's about Material Design XAML Toolkit for WPF.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, Material Design is a whole design system that Google came up with, primarily for web stuff, of course, because Google is web.
Right.
And it's all about, icons and buttons and list boxes and all the different UI things that you see in a browser. But these are all just really nice looking and nice working and well-designed things that all work together in a system. And there's now, on GitHub, Butcher's Boy has come out with Material Design in XAML Toolkit. Or you can just go to materialdesigninxaml.net, and it's Google's Material Design in XAML and WPF for C# and VBNet.
That is very cool. And it's got a very nice aesthetic, very clean.
One thing that's very cool, and this is the first thing I did, I downloaded just a binary sample app in WPF, so you can walk all the way through all of the different UI elements and really get a sense for what's in the box.
Nice.
Not only that, but there's a whole icon library, which is great because that's always the last thing you do.
Yep.
Right? Oh my God, I need an icon.
Now I need an icon.
And the last thing you want to do is come up with your own that won't be quite the same as everybody else's.
Yeah.
There used to be a whole thing back in the sort of 90s. I remember working with a CRM system, and one of their advertising points was that they had their own unique UI. It's like, that's the last thing you want. You just want to be a consistent UI with everything else.
Yeah,
so yeah, you want icons that everyone will recognize.
Yes.
That's cool.
So there you go. It's quite a cool Material Design in XAML toolkit. Know it, learn it, love it. Richard, who's talking to us?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1407, which we did with Mr. Skeet back in January of 2017, talking about Nota Time, Google Cloud, and many other subjects. I think we went the gambit that day.
Yeah, we did.
As we are prone to doing. And as usual, generates a ton of comments. One of them is from Tom Brown. It says, "Hi, John." So addressing you directly there, John. "I really like the advice on preparing your questions for Stack Overflow and the use of a console app. I first started on with online questions using Steve Jones's SQL Server Central, and soon got told by the site's guru how to format questions concisely to make it easier for others to reproduce my problem. I have found that making simplified tables, depersonalized data, refactoring queues to isolate the precise issue makes me think more about it, and often I work up my own solution before I've even posed the question."
Oh, this is music to my ears.
Yes, exactly.
This is something that I think we'll probably talk about more in detail. It's a real passion of mine, is the skills that we either have lost or haven't passed on properly in terms of diagnosing problems. And part of diagnosing a problem well is isolating it down, distilling it.
Yes, to the minimum.
To the minimum. And at that point, you're more likely to be able to solve it yourself. And even if you can't, you're in a much, much better position to pass it on to someone else.
Right.
And Carl and I are talking about something for my work in terms of, well, this doesn't quite work properly. Okay, let's see if we can reproduce it in an absolutely minimal way. We don't need to be doing anything useful. We just need to reproduce the problem.
Get it down as narrow as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great to hear that the advice, well, it sounds like he was already taking the advice before I gave it.
Right.
But that it resonates.
And then realize the power of doing that sometimes knocks the problem out entirely.
Absolutely. And it's almost a shame when that happens if you then lose the useful information for other people.
Right, the distillation.
Yeah. So I've actually started blogging a few times now. If I've got a problem and I thought, well, how am I going to diagnose what's going on here? So I had this a long time ago, as in a year or so ago, where I had some NUnit tests that were running slowly on .NET Core on Linux, but fast on .NET Core on Windows. And it ended up being a difference in the speed of string.starts-with on .NET Core on Windows. This only showed when you were using English UK or ENGB, because it's optimized on Windows but not on Linux. And it was a massive, massive performance difference.
Wow.
But it went through, well, is it something in Node-time? No, get that out of the picture. Is it something in NUnit itself? I had to dive deeply into what every single, this happened on every single assert.equals.
Wow.
So, right, what's going on there? And eventually get down to a tiny application that proves it has an issue, that doesn't use any Node-time, doesn't use any NUnit. But it's really interesting following the procedure of how I got there.
Right.
And I'm hoping that if I'm doing this more regularly now, I've got, ironically, another one to do on NUnit. They now have a .NET test runner, and it's not behaving quite the way I expect. And I haven't done any real diagnostic work yet, but when I filter by category, it seems to still take just as long as when I don't. So it's as if it's running all the tests and then only reporting the filtered in ones.
What do you bet it is?
So who knows what the problem's going to be, but I will write it up literally as I'm going, including all the wrong turns and things.
And it's a good encouragement to Tom. It's like, just because you've answered your question by doing good diagnostics doesn't mean you shouldn't write it up somewhere so that somebody else can save time on it.
Yeah.
And Tom went on to say, the work I put into preparing good questions has surely expanded my knowledge.
Yeah. Right. Oh, it absolutely does. And it's also, it's not just for problems you face where you've got a bug. It's if you're reporting an issue to someone else, this is how you reproduce it. Right. And if you can give them the absolute minimum repro, that's just ideal. And also when you're answering a bug, if you say, well, I can't reproduce it, with what you've given me, here's something that I tried to use to reproduce it and it didn't.
Right.
Or maybe even, yes, I've now managed to reproduce it. Here's a shorter version that reproduces it.
Right.
It's just...
They're refinements of the problem.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Tom, thank you so much for your comment. A .NET Rocks mug. It's on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media. So we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet. We try our best to repro them. All right, well, let's formally introduce Jon. Jon Skeet is a software engineer for Google in London who plays with C# somewhat obsessively in his free time. He loves writing and talking about C#, and the third edition of C# in Depth was published in September 2013. Writing less formally, Jon spends a lot of time on Stack Overflow, where a lot is an understatement. Give him a puzzle about how C# behaves, which gets him reaching for the language spec, and Jon is a happy bunny. Jon lives in Reading with his wife and 3 children. Welcome back to the show, Jon.
Lovely to be here.
I want to start with the little interaction that you and I had by email the other day, which fits right into our topic. I have been doing an application that uses a Google Cloud service.
Yep.
And the authentication and authorization stuff is kind of tricky for a guy like me who's used to really explicit examples from Microsoft and whatever. And, you know, just looking at a REST specification, just like I wasn't getting it. And basically, it turned out that I was having a problem with one of my NuGet packages. There was an error that I got that had something to do with a file. I think it was a assembly not found, right? It was basically a native assembly that was part of a NuGet package that it didn't have installed, and wasn't sure quite why that happened. And the workaround was that I had to find it on my computer, copy it into the project, and then, you know, in my load statements, copy that into the bin directory.
And to be clear, we are going to resolve that as soon as I can get it done. We're going to sort that.
Yeah, as it turns out, it's so nobody else is having the problem. Like, I mean, some people had it in the past, but it was fixed. Like, this may be a problem with versioning on my part. It's clearly something that I was struggling with.
It's a difficulty because relatively few NuGet packages have native code in. Right.
Yeah.
And particularly, it used to be relatively easy. If you were targeting .NET, you were targeting .NET. Now there's targeting .NET Core versus desktop.NET, and how are you publishing this application? And there's all kinds of things. So you're using web forms. Yeah. That's not something I have tested on. I use ASP.NET Core a fair amount, and it's all fine there.
Well, you know, like I say, I don't want to make this about Google and errors and bugs and stuff. It was clearly a problem that I was just having. You know, something that I didn't do right. Maybe I had the wrong NuGet package installed. That's probably what it was when it comes down to it. But anyway, I was having this conversation, and I got an email from Jon. Hey, I would like to see a repro of this. You know, I'm trying to, because I had sent repro instructions to Chris Sells, and he sent it on to you. So I just thought that it's just really cool how you know, how responsive you guys are to figuring out these problems, and how difficult sometimes it is, even when there is adequate documentation to figure stuff out. Yeah,
and to be clear, you gave a repro that clearly repros for you and doesn't for me. So I tried the steps that you did, and I tried, right, well, why don't I try with brand new web forms and add the NuGet package? And that worked for me. So one of the things we're going to look at later is what is the difference in our environments. Yes. I don't think it was a NuGet package version number issue.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who knows what it is yet?
We don't know, but we'll figure it out.
But yeah,
and you know, I think maybe if I could just surmise a solution, I think my laptop is possessed by Satan.
Okay, that's certainly. Can I close that as the
I think we'll close it right now.
Yeah, close solution exorcism. Well, what is reformatting the operating system but an exorcism, really? You know, when you get right down to it.
But your point about, you know, this is something that only I'm running against. Well, maybe not. It's just maybe other people don't feel comfortable reporting the issue.
Maybe.
And I'm Mr. Corner case. So the number of times that I run across problems that I would have thought would affect other people, but apparently don't.
So, yeah. Right.
So, you know, I'm with you on this.
I want you to know, Jon, for the rest of us, the fact that you find corner cases is not surprising. We're all pretty comfortable with the fact that you're out there compared to what a lot of the rest of us are doing.
But I don't look for them. I mean, if I'm reviewing the language specification or something, I'll think, yeah, well, what if it's a non-nullable struct or whatever? But for most cases, I just seem to run into them all over the place.
It's like you're the guy who happily skips along the edge of the cliff and call it a Wednesday, right? Like it's just a normal thing for you. It's like, oh, there's stuff on the edge of the cliff. No kidding. That's why we don't go over there. Why are you there?
But it never feels. It just feels like the normal path to me.
I get that.
That's awesome.
You're very happy there.
I suspect actually that there are probably a bunch of time zone things that I haven't found by living in London because I would only see them for half of the year.
Right.
If you've got things which will only show up when you're not in UTC, that cuts me out for half the time.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are a lot of internationalization things that ENUS folks don't see that the rest of us do.
Honey, we're moving to Utah.
I'm thinking Nepal. You need to be on one of those 45 time zones.
Well, yeah, I've thought it would be quite good if you're ever wanting to make sure that your system really doesn't rely on the system time zone. Just set it to something that's not even 45, but 23 minutes and 5 seconds off. Or whatever. You'll notice that pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly. I still tell Note of Time stories every so often.
Good, please do.
Just that
Spread
idea
the word.
But just the concept that time zones are politics. They are not science.
Right.
And
they're
certainly
almost hearsay in some cases. The fact that the time zone database that most of the world uses, so everything outside Windows, and hopefully Windows is gradually moving in that direction, that's hosted by IANA, it's all run by volunteers. And so, apologies, I may have told this story on previous episodes. Sorry, listeners. But things like, we're trying to find out when Egypt's going to switch into DST. And so far, the rules for the IANA contribution list say there has to be something official and in English so that we don't get things lost in translation. 'Cause how easy would it be to lose something in translation about whether it's 1 o'clock wall time or 1 o'clock standard time or 1 o'clock UTC or whatever.
Right.
Yes.
And the closest we could find was something on the Egyptian government's Facebook page or something like that. It's like,
oh man,
why is the world run like this? Surely we can do something better than this.
It's all the people in it, darn it.
I find it astonishing, actually, astonishingly good that this year we're in 2017. It's now September, and we're only on 2017B edition of time zone data. So there have only been 2 sets of changes published. I think we're aware of some more that need to be published soon.
Okay, now, what? Public changes? What? This really happens?
So I think last year we got up to J or something.
What?
So this isn't saying we're now changing into DST. This is the rules for when it changes.
That's what I'm saying.
Like the US changed, was it 2005?
Yes.
Changed so that it was
They moved it like another month.
2 weeks either end, one way or the other. I can't remember.
Canada followed along.
Right.
Because otherwise you just miss a lot of meetings.
Well, we have an interesting time where instead of being 8 hours different, I'm 7 hours different.
Right.
And then later on 9 hours different.
Yes.
So how does Windows deal with this, right?
So
how
Windows pushes stuff out by Windows Update, and I think it used to be at least only once every 6 months. So things could be out for a very long time. But different operating systems will push it in different ways. A friend of mine works on Android, and one of the areas that he works on is how Android handles time zone updates. Which you can imagine is really interesting because there's native code there's Java code. You would kind of like them to have the same data.
You'd think, yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought they all just relied on IANA. I thought that Microsoft was the goof here.
Yes, but there can be different copies of IANA data. So if you're running a Java app, so let's leave Android out of it. Let's just talk, you're running a Java application on your desktop. Well, that's going to use the version of the time zone data that's part of Java. It's built into rt.jar. Or something like that. And there used to be a time zone updater tool.
Right.
I'm not sure whether the tool still exists or whether they just do it via other updates. But yes, you could even have 2 different Java applications that each come bundled with their own JRE, as sometimes happens, particularly for sort of Git clients and things. They often come bundled with the JRE, and they can think that the time's different. Yay!
What about Chrome? How does Chrome deal with JavaScript essentially?
I believe JavaScript tends to use IANA time zones. I don't know how Chrome gets updated information, whether it relies on the operating system or whether it has its own built-in versions. But yeah, it's
a lot of stuff to think about.
Yeah, and imagine how difficult it is when governments sometimes only say that this is happening like 2 days in advance or less. They've previously had decrees saying, by the way, we went into daylight saving time this morning.
Yeah.
Warning, please.
And so how do you, getting back to diagnostics and debugging, somebody comes to you with a bug in no time, you have to now reproduce that bug.
Right. So the first thing, it's great because
you may
the first
have
thing I can do.
You may have two things, right? A client and a server that are both in different time zones.
Yep. And if they're both using Node time, I can say, okay, report date time zone providers.tcdb, another name for the IANA ones, .version ID. And it will tell me which version of the data it is. And then you can load up whatever version you want fairly easily. So there's the built-in version, but we've made it deliberately pluggable so that you can just say, hey, I wish to load a time zone provider from this data source.
Right.
And when there's a new version, we come up with a new file on the website appropriately.
Wow. And hold that thought just for a moment while we take a minute to hear a word from our sponsors. This episode of .NET Rocks is made possible in part by Windows on the Google Cloud platform.
What? Isn't this a .NET show?
Yeah, .NET runs on the Google Cloud platform, man.
Everything in .NET?
You bet. All the .NET Core libraries and more, including 200 plus Google.com and cloud services. Hey, Jon Skeet's behind it. He's a genius.
The Jon Skeet? The Rescue the Princess Jon Skeet from Stack Overflow?
Yeah, the one and only. You can deploy your ASP.NET Windows apps to Compute Engine or your ASP.NET Core apps to App Engine or Container Engine, which is Google's hosted Kubernetes environment, and it runs like, well, Google.
What about Visual Studio integration? Oh, it's there. I'm reading it now. You can use Visual Studio to manage your GCP resources and deploy your existing apps.
Yep. You can get stack driver logging, error reporting, and tracing support for .NET and .NET Core.
Also, there are PowerShell commandlets for GCP, which run on Windows and Linux.
And if you need help, there are a great set of partners to get workloads to GCP, including Capgemini, Nudezic, and Magenic.
So go to gcp.netrocks.com and get your free trial today.
.NET on Google. Who knew?
And you're listening to .NET Rocks. Carl and Richard here in London at the ProgNet conference, talking to Jon Skeet. And I just can't seem to get away from time zones because they're just so awesome. But there is this larger story about just trying to diagnose these kinds of problems well. Do you see it as a lost art? I mean, I think we all do it. You've been developers long enough with poor enough tools that you figure out a way.
Well, the three of us may all do it.
Because we're all old.
Yeah. I really think that is something to do with it, or at least it's when you started doing things.
Right.
So we're probably all used to writing console apps because that was all there was.
Right.
And if you wanted to write a GUI, well, you'd have to break into Win32, and it was horrible, or predecessors to Win32.
Right.
And it was really painful. Whereas quite often I see people say, I want to reproduce a problem, I will create a WinForms app and a button, and when you click the button, I'll run the code that I want to run that's actually got the problem. That's got nothing to do with a GUI. It's like, you've got 3 lines of useful code and 1,000 lines of GUI builder code. Just put it in a console app.
Right.
Yeah. And this is, so for a while, my passion has been, let's get date and time working for .NET properly. And I feel, I'm not going to say it's solved, but Node time is in a position where I'm comfortable. I'm making tweaks now, but it's really only tweaks. So I'm going to be putting a lot of effort into blogs and podcasts and screencasts and talks and all kinds of things, saying we need to get better at diagnostics as a community, because it's a community thing that we can pass on knowledge. And some of the difficulty of that is not sounding condescending while we do so.
Yeah.
Right.
But when you see Stack Overflow questions, which are, here are 300 lines of code, and I don't know where the problem is, and I haven't worked it out. And I used to think this was just laziness. And I think it's so pervasive now. This isn't just laziness. Some people maybe know how to do it and can't be bothered and want other people to do the work for them.
Right.
Other people just aren't being taught. And this is one of the problems of computer science versus software engineering in university. And I don't know whether it pervades school systems. I've got 3 boys in school. So I'm sure I will be interacting with their computing teachers and saying, so what do you do in terms of teaching diagnostics? What to do when it goes wrong? It feels to me like the most fundamental thing. Why are we trying to teach people how to write 12-factor apps and do all kinds of really deep, difficult stuff without the basic building blocks of what do I do when it goes wrong?
It really starts with critical thinking skills, doesn't it? And that's something that They don't teach in schools in the United States, really. I mean, I've never seen a class in critical thinking, you know.
And it sort of doesn't need to be a specific class so much as the source material is everywhere, because when you're learning to code, things go wrong.
Yeah.
I don't, maybe every program you've ever written just works, but it certainly doesn't for me. So it shouldn't be difficult to find examples. If the teacher said, right, when something goes wrong, maybe stop the whole class. Everyone else, stop what you're doing.
Right.
Let's work out where things are wrong.
Right.
And from that, you could potentially get code sharing and collaboration, and the idea of you can take pride in your code without feeling you're the only one who can touch it.
Sure. Yeah, which is very powerful.
Very powerful. And that comes along with humility of, this is my code. I know it's broken. I know it's not the best code in the world.
Yeah.
Which, that's part of the fear of going open source, is then they'd be able to see my code. Then they'd be able to see how awful
ugly
it is.
my baby really is.
And I think largely, if you know that it's going to be public, you do put a bit more effort into it. The Node-time code base is the code base I am most proud of that I have ever written, in terms of, I think it's pretty nice.
Pretty orderly.
And that's partly because I knew from the start that it would be public. And also, you know, I have my own time scale for it. You know, it could take a while. I wasn't up against deadlines. Anyway, back to this classroom. So, you know, you stop the class, you say, right, put the code up on the screen. Right. Let's think, have we got a unit test for this? So teaching unit testing. I went to a university to give a talk to a computer science class, saying, here are the things you need to know about software engineering that I bet you're not being taught.
Right.
And it was things like, you should use version control.
How does the prof react to that?
Oh, the prof invited me to give this after I gave a previous talk on career progress, which I'm the worst person to talk to about career progress, because I just sort of seem to fall into the nice things.
Just be awesome. But that's what I tell people.
Version control, not to derail you, Sean.
Version control. So, you know, hands up, how many people are using version control? Everyone can do it on GitHub.
Yeah.
About
It's free.
3 out of 40 people.
Right.
How many of you are writing unit tests? 1.
Yeah.
And bigger things around, do you know how to talk to people? How to write emails that are not microaggressive, that get to the point quickly without being too brusque? Do you know how to work with people? Because that's far, far more important than...
How about just how to respond to email? Like that you have to respond to email is just something
that's something.
Especially younger people need to understand, because email's not in their wheelhouse, really. I mean,
Right.
People come right out of college.
I don't understand the whole, I'll organize something on Facebook Messenger, and I'm aware that's where some people live, and it's just somewhere I don't go. And you know, I know when I need to go there for whatever reason, but email just is my default thing. And likewise, people say, oh, we'll set up a Slack channel. It's like, oh, please don't. I would like to, I will respond. Things. It's good for some things, but it puts this constant pressure on.
Right.
You know, it's fine if you have effectively a chat environment, but the idea of using it as a support mechanism that's constantly monitored or whatever.
How I use Slack effectively is when AppVNext has a new project and a new customer, I'll connect the customer directly to the developers, or the developer or developers doing the work, and everything is discussed in that Slack channel, you know, between them. So there's no emails that I can't see, and you know, then we have a history of the communication of how this app was built.
Right. So it's effectively meetings by text,
and
that makes perfect sense. But then presumably you've said, right, turn up at this channel at a particular time, and you know, for the next 2 hours or whatever.
There isn't chit chat.
Right, and it's the should you be constantly present and have to respond synchronously. I'm a big fan of asynchronous communication. So if I receive an email saying, "Can you show up to somewhere?" I can wait until I'm at home, check my calendar, etc. And I don't have to feel I'm constantly on display.
It is an interesting balancing act between your availability and your ability to control interruptions to be productive.
Yes. And I would like to think I context switch. I'm useless at multitasking. I'm good at context switching. So in my work with Google Cloud Platform, the client libraries, we're juggling many different libraries for, data store, storage, BigQuery, speech API, vision API, natural languages, video intelligence, spanner. I could keep going. And each of them is at a different stage and has, what's the next stage? And I've got to switch between them on a sort of hourly basis.
Sure, but not on a minutely basis.
Not on a minutely basis. Can you imagine if I had a Slack channel open for each of those?
Oh,
Yes.
jeez, yeah.
And people thought they'd just come in and say hi. It's like, oh, right now.
Yeah. So we were talking about these psychological things that people have to come to grips with. One of them is just the fact that bugs happen, the fact that errors happen. It's our human nature to go, this doesn't work, and just throw up your hands and, now I'm a failure and all these other crazy things. And really, what do you think about just the advice of lowering your expectations, right? What is it, Richard? You say that you're a pessimist because you're never disappointed and sometimes pleasantly surprised.
I'm usually right and occasionally pleasantly surprised.
But, expect that you're going to have to take time to unpack some of these things that aren't just going to be as easy as you write a line of code and it works perfectly.
I like your statement earlier on about it's just the humility of it.
So I think humility, I'm an optimist, and I think that has positive effects as well. But I think it does need to come with humility. And I was thinking about this a while ago. I should look up the derivations. I assume that humility and humiliation have the same derivation.
Right.
Sure.
And wouldn't it be nice if they didn't have to? If
they
you
both
could
start
be
with
humble. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there must be a relation there.
Yeah.
But one of my best received tweets, which came after a Stack Overflow question where someone had said, I know my code is right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's always a bad start.
Right. Works on my machine.
Right.
Yeah.
So, or in this case, I think it didn't even work on their machine, but they assumed that it should.
Right.
And I think the attitude has to be, our world is so awesome, our world of software is so awesome that we can do amazing things.
Right.
But anything I write is probably going to be wrong.
Yeah. Right.
If I find a problem, it will probably be my fault rather than the compiler's fault.
Right.
And sometimes it will be. I've found enough compiler bugs to know that there are weird corner cases and library cases and things. But that assumption of it's probably you is a really useful one to start
That's
with.
the humility angle, right? Humility is something you put on yourself.
Right.
As opposed to humiliation, which is brought to you by others.
Right.
Ultimately, it is you, though, that reacts to it. Yeah. You feel humiliation.
You choose to be humiliated.
That's
ultimately.
right. Yeah. Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah. It's time to cancel my subscription to It Works on My Machine magazine and pick up the latest issue of Let's Get Down in the Gubbins.
Gubbins. Oh, this is what happens when you spend a few days in the UK. Words appear.
John taught me that word.
Probably
we were doing a
the
DNR
kind of thing
TV.
I would. Right.
Yeah, we were doing a DNR TV, and you were unpacking async await.
I thought it might be on async, yeah.
And you said something like, just all that gubbins in there. And I said, wait, whoa.
What's a gubbin?
It's separated by a common language.
There you go.
It's actually time to give away a D-Experience subscription from DevExpress to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with DevExpress UI controls and libraries, and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best without limits or compromise. And check out their DevExtreme React Grid, built from the ground up to fully support all the cool features that come with React, like the virtual DOM and state controllers like Redux. It supports master detail, sorting, grouping, paging, and editing. You can check it out and test it for free by getting it from GitHub. Now learn more and download your free 30-day trial of DevExpress Universal at devexpress.com/superhero.
Well, all right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Dion Brown.
Congratulations, Dion. Golf clap for you, sir.
And Dion just won the D-Experience subscription, a big pile of awesome from our friends at Dev Express, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsor, and every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of said fan club. But you got to sign up to win. And now it's your turn, John. If you had $5,000 to spend on technology right now, what would you buy?
Oh, I should have remembered that this would come up.
Yep.
Because my initial reaction is probably the same as I suspect it was on previous shows. I really fancy HoloLens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to try that. I have tried it very briefly at CodeMash, and didn't really get long enough to get into it properly.
Yeah.
I need the instruction manual and make sure I've got everything right, and of course build my own stuff. But yeah, that still looks like a lot of fun. I don't know at what point HoloLens is going to come into the mainstream and be a fully released.
I think we're overdue for new hardware.
We definitely.
I suspect it's going to be early next year. There's a bunch of third-party VR gear that's running holographic OS, the Windows holographic. It's supposed to come out with the Christmas time frame. So, and much less expensive, a few $100s.
Right.
So, I've had the sense that Microsoft has backed off to give those guys some room while they've been busy tinkering away with some third generation thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm.
It's bound to be branded Surface by the time
I wonder.
It feels like it. Although, given that there's a lack of a Surface on it.
Yes.
How are they going to do that? Surfaceless.
Surfaceless. That's what it is.
By the way, there was a rumor, and we talked about this on a previous show. There was a rumor that, and it was just a rumor that, Microsoft was killing off HoloLens because they announced there wasn't going to be a new version, or somebody said that there wasn't going to be.
I thought they were killing V2 to go straight to V3 or something.
And that was this thing with the VR headset.
I think that's what it was. But we basically got the word right from Microsoft that no, nothing's dying, nothing's going away.
Right.
We just don't have anything to announce right now, but you just wait. It's going to be awesome.
Well, and doing the math, there's been 3 iterations of Moore's Law since the current hardware, the stuff that's $3,000, came out.
Yeah.
And so each one of those represents a doubling, either a halving in price or a halving in power consumption. Right. So I think with 3, it's like cut the price, cut the weight and the heat.
Yep.
And increase the compute so we've got full field of view and, a little crisper, a little brighter.
Yeah.
You should be able to get all of those at once.
Should be.
I just want it to be amazing. That's all I'm looking for.
Well, and the HoloLens currently is amazing. It really is.
So imagine,
it could be even more.
Imagine how much more amazing it'd be. Anyway, I can't argue with you,
HoloLens, that's what, about $2,500 these days?
Yeah, $3,000.
The other thing I would be interested to play with is a Surface Hub.
Yeah.
Those look fun.
You could
Where is my digital whiteboard?
Yeah, it's just
I don't even need one. The problem is that the Surface Hubs are huge.
They make an 85 and they make a 42.
Yeah, and 42 is still big for my shed.
Big, yeah.
Because I work in my shed at home most of the time.
And it's $8,000, I think.
Right.
So.
And that's too much for a shed. Now I'm starting to run out of wall space. I just bought a lovely Miro print, and so I'm filling my shed with artwork instead of technology. So, can I take that money and buy more mirrors? I don't know.
But especially when we can get rid of a whiteboard, get rid of the projector, like all of that in one device.
Yeah.
And I think it's very compelling.
And it feels to me like we have incredibly high DPI touch screens these days.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't need to be incredibly high DPI.
Right.
So give me something that's sort of, I would normally say A3 or maybe A2. I don't know what that corresponds to in US sizes.
Right.
But yeah. A normal, small personal whiteboard, that would be incredibly useful if that were a touch screen and 1920 by 1080, so relatively low DPI, but still enough information there. And then I can draw and send it to someone else's whiteboard that I'm having a meeting with in real time, and all kinds of things that my guess is that Surface Hub does a lot of that stuff, and that's why I would like to play with it. Although probably if you're the only person with a Surface Hub that that may not be ideal.
It's just like being the only person with a fax machine.
I'll tell you what, I recently got an Asus AIO Pro Z240.
You're just giving random numbers and letters at this point.
I know. It's basically it's a all-in-one computer from Asus, and it was about $3,000. And it has a 3840 by 2160 screen, which is a 23-inch screen. Right. 4K screen. And it's touch and, runs all the latest Windows 10 stuff and 185 PPI. and it's really amazing. So, one of those could satisfy your Jones for a
exactly,
for a
except
whiteboard.
it's sort of 5 times the price it would need to be, and 5 times as awesome. So I don't need that high resolution. I don't need the massive amount of compute behind it, because I want something that I can carry around if necessary. Certainly carry into a meeting room and then carry out if
It's
I'm
very
going to.
tablet-y when
Yeah.
what you're describing.
So think of something that's bigger than a tablet, so it's more for collaboration, because you can get 3 people around a tablet. Kind of, exactly.
Something in the 21, 23,
Yeah.
so it's still carryable.
Exactly.
You want a mount so that it hangs on the wall easily.
Yep. And ideally can charge from there. And
And then you can also lay it on the table so 3 people can huddle around it and manipulate it.
And I haven't got a Surface Dial yet. I'm sort of tempted, but that kind of thing, at least the kind of thinking that leads to the Surface Dial is the kind of thinking that would lead to the device I want.
This kind of collaborative
but I'm
device.
not in UX research and things, so I'm not in the right place to make it happen.
I agree with you, John. There's a notch there of just like, this is a fairly interesting, the collaboration device.
Yeah. And going back to earlier on when we were saying about things that software engineers need to learn, most of it, frankly, is about people rather than about technology.
Yeah, well, I think that's been true for a while now. It's like, look, the tech can do it. The question is, why are we struggling to do it?
Yeah. And why are we struggling to express ourselves appropriately with our colleagues and express what we want clearly and things? I think a lot of the issues in the tech industry come down to that, whether they're issues in terms of we haven't invented the right things or we haven't got the right people in. So while you were giving your talk, I was sorry to miss it, but I had to give a talk myself. And I don't know about your room, but mine was almost entirely men. And we've got to do better at making an inclusive environment. And it's our community to build, as it were. We can't just say, well, if women want to come along, they can. If we maintain this sort of often somewhat macho environment, then it will be seen as hostile to many. And that's, again, just getting back to interacting with people and empathy. Think about all the internationalization issues you've ever seen. A lot of it starts off with, do you know what? I don't need to think about what someone else from another country will see and want to see.
I'm only going to worry about English. And even only one flavor of English at that, just U.S. English. And same for the input challenges, right? Someone who's colorblind, hearing impaired, visually impaired, like it's not that much harder. And it makes a better product. I think we've had a couple of really good inclusiveness, diversity type shows recently around the tech, just showing, hey, the process of thinking through this problem to help someone who's visually impaired be able to use it made it a better product for everybody.
Right.
And I think it's true in culture as well. That the process of actually creating a diversively inclusive environment is simply a better environment.
Absolutely. And it doesn't need to be what people fear of everyone having to walk around on eggshells and never say anything challenging. A psychologically safe environment doesn't mean no one disagrees. It means you disagree respectfully, and there can still be really vigorous disagreement that can lead to fantastic ideas.
And chances are you're going to learn something
every
day.
And if you're willing to listen to people, you're much, much more likely to learn something than if you're just listening to an echo chamber.
There is very much a trap of I want everyone to agree, and so you end up with sameness. That's the asset. But it's like, hey, steel is tempered with heat. Like you need a certain amount of friction to actually make the best version of anything. But
it's got to be of the right kind. And everyone's got to buy into how we can discuss things positively.
Well, there's a conversation about how Socratic do we need to be? Like how deeply are we going after each thing? How do we approach it? What are the tones around all that?
And an assumption that well, if I bring science to the mix, and if I say everything in an impersonal way, then no one will take it personally.
It's
like, no, that just doesn't work.
Not really work that way.
And unfortunately, it comes to much more than tech. So this is kind of going possibly off the topic of .NET Rocks a bit, but the whole tone of empathy and theme of empathy and respect for everyone, however different, I think could be so societally changing. And it comes to 3-4-year-olds. It starts really, really early on.
Yeah.
And there's so much progress that can be made if we aren't dismissing half, 2/3 of the world.
It's not just like a moral issue. It's good business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was at a school probably a year ago and laid out my diversity stance. This is something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah.
And someone said, so are you in favor of getting more women in tech for moral reasons or for business reasons? And I had to say,
yes.
well, I would in either way, but the great thing is they both work.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't have to pick.
Exactly. If you were to say to recruiters, right, in this company, I'm only going to allow people with a surname that begins with A to M. If they're N to Z, I'm just...
Not working here.
Do you think the recruiter might say, you might miss out on some of the best candidates that way?
Yeah.
So it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Unless we are really saying that, and just to pick men, women as the initial borderline,
Yeah.
and not assuming that everyone is binary, man or woman either, unless you assume that women just physically, naturally can't be as good as men. So, and I'm rejecting that assumption
I think
explicitly.
I'm going to let that one go.
Right.
Don't think so.
If we're rejecting that assumption, then we should be really shocked at the numbers that we see.
Right.
We are acting as if we do accept that assumption.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from before the tech industry gets involved, but a lot happens after we get involved too. And there's retention as well as hiring, all kinds of things. So yeah, I'd encourage everyone to really take a step back and think about it. If you're worried that some people, I think feel, well, if we have twice as many people wanting to get into the tech industry, then I might not do as well. I wouldn't be quite as high. And I would say
That's not an argument.
that may happen. And I'm sorry, but
it's encouragement to be better for starters.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
We're still
if
going,
you're worried about your skills, then level up.
Man, your skills better. And there's so many jobs going unfilled.
Right.
The joke over on the run as space, whenever it's like cloud's going to take away our jobs, is like, how many of you have made it to the bottom of your to-do list?
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And let's face it, putting incentives in our laps to be better at things makes us better at them.
Yep.
And it's not a painful thing either.
And it will make the world better for us. So if we had better ideas, more diverse ideas coming through, then the laptops we use might be better.
Yeah.
Visual Studio might be better.
Yes.
Whatever it is that you look at, the more we get high quality ideas coming through, the better things will be.
Yep.
So yeah, even if I had to take a bit of a pay cut because I was on average, lower than I am now, then I think it's still a net win for me.
Right.
And I don't think that would actually be the case. I think it would, a rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah. 1 + 1 = 3 on most of these scenarios, right? I don't know how diagnostically oriented that these aspects are, although definitely when it comes to figuring out a problem, a diversity of viewpoints helps.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
And even the awareness of diversity of situations. So if you look at a problem and say it's a string manipulation problem and you're coming to it from an English perspective and you have never thought about your non-English speaking users,
Right.
you will look at a reported bug and say, no, that can't be a problem.
Yeah.
Well, okay, it only comes when I'm writing in Japanese or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, now, okay, why didn't I think that might be the problem?
2 bytes per character rather than 1.
Well, and just the formatting differences, right? Spend a little time in Hebrew or Arabic, working right to left.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden so many built-in assumptions about
Yeah.
UI design that are left to right biased.
It seems insurmountable, though, to do that kind of... I mean, if you're talking about a Windows app, definitely. I mean, we used to... where I got my start in this business at Crescent Software, we had tools that were for Windows developers, right? But we had to outsource the translations to one to German, one to Japanese, and they basically took our code and ported everything with the documentation and the code, and it was a big job.
Yep.
But on the web, it's a little bit easier, I think, isn't it?
I know nothing about the right to left side of things, and as I've probably said before, I'm a libraries person. I don't do applications, so I've managed to avoid a lot of that. But I do want to come back to what you were saying about the assumptions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely relevant to diagnostics.
Sure.
In that half the effort of diagnostics is acknowledging your assumptions and then testing them.
Yeah.
And if you're not aware of your assumptions, then you can't possibly find the problem if you are subconsciously assuming that it's not in one place, which is why the whole I know that my code is right, but it doesn't work.
You got to lose your ego to have to be good at diagnostics.
Well, it goes back to the problem you two are actually working on together right now, which I think you've already acknowledged. Okay, it's not where we were looking. There's a problem with our assumptions.
Right.
We need to now take a step back and say, what other factors are operating here? Because your recreation doesn't have the same
Exactly.
issue.
We've tried doing what should be the same, should be in heavy air quotes, and it's not the same. So why isn't it the same?
It's that next step, right?
Exactly.
That next step is acknowledging, okay, there's assumptions here. Let us run down things we are not thinking of that affect that.
And in the first half of the show, I scheduled an exorcism for my computer. So
nice.
We'll let you know if you actually go to the comments, the discuss comments on the website or on the mobile app. I will update everybody on
what actually
the
happened.
Outcome of our debugging session.
Doing in your machine.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yep. Well, should we talk about tools? I mean, there are a lot of diagnostic tools. There's some great stuff built into Visual Studio that will even, take snapshots and screenshots and make repro videos and things like that.
I've hardly used any of those, and it doesn't mean that they're not useful. I tend to just fall back to console apps as soon as I can.
Right.
Yeah.
And it depends on what I'm doing. Unit tests are obviously great.
Yeah.
And if I'm finding a bug in no time, or rather, reproducing a bug in no time, I will write a unit test. I have to say, for whatever reason, and again, I'm corner casey, I seem to have problems attaching debuggers to unit tests. In various cases, whether it's that most of the code I write is cross-platform, so is .NET Core with multiple target frameworks, and I think that confuses some debuggers.
Right.
And,
I don't feel like debuggers have caught up with where Core is.
Right. And I know that they're working hard. So I've talked with the folks at DevExpress about CodeBrush.
Yeah.
So reported some bugs and things got fixed, and I'm not sure whether it's the same thing has become unfixed in some way, but I always seem to have problems.
I do feel like we're kind of at an interesting schism right now in the .NET ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because Microsoft has made this move to cross-platforming Core. But, I mean, we're recording this in early or middle September. Core 2 dropped a month ago.
Yeah.
And how much of the community, how much of the ecosystem now is they haven't been paying attention to Core.
Right.
Because it was too young.
Yeah.
And now we finally have a version. It's like, this is the version you should probably pay attention to. And suddenly, by the way, you now have to test on all these platforms.
Yep.
If you're really going to serve it, if you're really going to be .NET Standard 2 compliant, you need to know how this is going to behave in Linux.
And there are some weird, so your problem with the ASP.NET web forms is failure to find the gRPC native extension.
Right.
We have the same problem, which I suspect has a completely different underlying cause, running an XUnit unit test under which targets NetCore App 1.0, works fine. Targeting NetCore App 2.0, again, can't find the exact same extension.
Really?
For weird different reasons that it doesn't copy libraries into the place, and there's a difference in terms of where XUnit is loading the assembly from under NetCore App 1 versus NetCore App 2.
Wow.
And we still don't know whether this is a deliberate difference in the core CLR or a change in XUnit, an inadvertent change. So you can be using the same version of XUnit, but under NetCore App 1, it works. NetCore App 2, it doesn't. Because we do probe, as you've probably seen from the error messages, we try to find those native libraries in a bunch of places.
Right.
So, we know that running NetCore, a lot of the time it will pick up the assembly from the NuGet cache. So we expect to find the native library under a particular place.
Right.
So all that kind of thing, yeah, you really do need to test. But running ASP.NET Core on NetCore 2.0 seems to be okay.
Yeah.
For the same thing. So yeah, there are some interesting combinations. But going back to debuggers, and tools for diagnostics, my advice tends to be to work out whether the problem you're facing is fundamental to the environment you're in,
right,
or not.
Yeah.
Right. So if it is fundamental to the environment you're in, then probably create a new, just as you suggested,
do, as soon as we're done here.
New web forms project, and just take the stock project, so that you can be adding as small amount of your code as possible to it.
Yeah.
And then you've at least got a clean slate.
Well, you build a new project very differently when you're pursuing a problem versus building the app.
Absolutely. And I've started just recently. I now have under my sort of projects directory, I have another one that is just issues, where I've got a subdirectory for each GitHub issue, and it's its own solution, its own project.
Right.
And that way I can keep it. I used to do sort of just throwaway projects.
Yeah.
And then I found, no, it's useful to be able to come back to this.
Sure. Yeah.
So I've got a directory issue. I think yours is 1409.
Wow.
all of these things. And so sometimes it will be environment specific. It clearly is in this needs ASP.NET Web Forms.
Yeah.
And in that case, you may find the tooling a little harder to use. So obviously ASP.NET has been around for a long time, but very mature tooling. But some tooling can be less mature. So if you're doing something or just harder to use, if you're doing Xamarin working with an iPhone, you can debug into the iPhone via all kinds of magical, mystical bits and pieces.
Right.
But if I'm investigating something that doesn't depend on that bit of UI, I would far rather do it in a console app or a unit test, whatever floats your boat for investigating this thing in an environment you're really comfortable in, that's really rapid iteration. I've got to be able to make a change.
Yeah.
And test it 2 seconds later. I don't want to have to deploy something to a phone again.
Right.
Unless it's to do with the phone itself, the phone's environment, in which case, at that point, you've got to suck it up and say, okay, it's going to be harder, but at least let's get rid of all my business logic. And the first thing is to work out whether the problem is the business logic or the actual environment.
Right. Well, I'm really interested to shut the recorder off and see exactly what's going wrong here. And like I said, we'll post the results on the page. But thanks, John. It's always great to talk to you.
My pleasure.
All right. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.